Hi, this is Minisa Robinson, and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to cover 10 tips for wood burning realistic animals. These tips are incredibly important no matter what animal you're trying to wood burn. I also have a bonus tip at the end, so be sure to watch all the way through. As I go over these 10 tips, I'll also be showing a video of me working on this lion project. So let's get started. Now these first few tips are things that you need to think about before you start burning. If you want your project to turn out well, then it's really important to plan ahead. Step number 1, start with a quality reference photo. This is one step that I cannot reinforce enough. If you start a project with a blurry or a low quality reference photo, then that will transfer over to your wood burning. Choose a photo that is high resolution and make sure that your subject looks nice. Don't choose a photo where the animal might be like in a weird position or that you may have to guess at what part of the animal you're looking at. I also recommend removing any branches or objects that may obscure the animal in the wood burning. Personally, I love showcasing the animal itself, and so I'll often choose a simple background, but that's just my personal preference. Step number 2 is sand the wood. Most wood from the store comes planed, so it's fairly smooth, but I strongly recommend sanding the wood before you burn. This creates a smoother surface to burn on and also reduces the carbon buildup on your point. I start with 220 grit and then go up to 600 grit sandpaper. Some artists like a higher grit and a smoother finish, others don't. So that's kind of up to you. The main thing is just make sure that your surface is silky smooth before you burn. Step number 3 is make sure that you use an accurate sketch or transfer. This is another very crucial step if you're trying to achieve realism in your wood burnings. You can start with a fantastic reference photo, but if you don't draw or transfer that onto the wood correctly, then you're going to have problems that will follow you throughout the entire project. If you prefer to freehand your subject, that is totally fine. But I strongly recommend that you create your drawing on paper and then transfer the image onto the wood using graphite paper. Drawing directly onto the wood with pencil can be difficult, and it can even damage the surface of the wood. Sometimes using a pencil on the wood, if you press down too hard, you can indent the wood fibers and leave lines that there's no way that you can get those out. Even sanding it a lot, you're still going to see those lines. So make sure that you don't have too much downward pressure if you do decide to draw directly onto the wood. Now personally, I prefer to transfer the image onto the wood with graphite paper directly from a printed reference photo. Yes, I can draw, and I have done a lot of freehand art over the years, but the simple fact is that it just takes too long. So I transfer as many details from the reference photo directly onto the wood. You'll also want to make sure that your graphite lines are not too dark. Take the time to gently sand them down until you can barely see them. Once you burn over those graphite lines, it can be much more difficult to remove them. If you're a beginner and you don't know how to transfer an image onto the wood using graphite paper, I have created a video here on YouTube, and I will have that link in the description below. After you have your quality image transferred onto the wood and the graphite lines sanded down, now it's time to start burning. So step number 4, and this is one of my biggest tips, is do not outline. One of the quickest ways to ruin a realistic wood burning is to burn heavy outlines around all the main features, whether it's a wildlife wood burning, a portrait, or anything else. Always create definition with shading and values instead of those harsh outlines. Step number 5, burn the eyes first. I always start my wood burnings with the eyes first. If the eyes aren't correct, then the whole project will look off. Pyrography can take a lot of time, and the eyes are often the most difficult aspect. So if you make sure that those eyes are well done in the beginning, then the rest of your project should be good as well. If you have problems with the eyes, then you can start over if you need to, and then you haven't spent a lot of time on a project that just didn't work out. Step number 6 is focus on the values. The biggest key to any realistic wood burning is to be mindful of the different zones and the values within the project. I use and teach the 5-step shading method for wood burning, and it's really important to include all 5 values within the wood burning. Don't be afraid to go really dark. This is where you'll develop depth and distance. A lot of beginning artists don't burn dark enough, and their projects often turn out kind of flat, with very little depth or realism. I show artists how to create that depth and realism in real-time video tutorials on my Patreon page. So be sure to check that out if you'd like to create more realistic wood burnings. One way to help see the different values is to work from a sepia or black and white reference photo. If you're working off of a colored reference photo, then your eyes tend to focus on the colors and the hues instead of the values. So definitely take the time to take your colored reference photo and turn it into a sepia toned one. If you're unsure how to do this, I've included a link to my video covering that in detail. The link will be in the description below. Step number 7 is follow the flow of the fur. If you're burning a project with fur, you must be mindful of the direction and the texture of the fur. If you're burning short fur, then use short strokes. If you're burning longer fur, then use longer strokes. Some really short and silky fur is so smooth that you don't need to burn those individual fur strokes at all. This is especially true with horses. In that case, you can just use some soft shading instead of fur strokes. But fur is very dynamic and it is constantly changing directions. Make sure that you follow those patterns and blend them together for a smooth and seamless transition. Step number 8 is be patient. Pyrography is a slow art form and can take a lot longer than other mediums. If you've spent 30 minutes on a project and you're disappointed at how it turned out, it's probably because you're working too quickly. An 8 by 10 inch project usually takes me about 8 to 10 hours, depending on the complexity of the piece. So really be patient with yourself. Step number 9 is layers, layers, layers. If you want to create depth and realism in your wildlife wood burnings, then you'll need to burn multiple layers. It can be very difficult to accurately burn fur in only one layer. A single layer of fur often looks really flat, and mistakes can be overwhelmingly obvious. But if you burn multiple layers of fur, then it's easier to hide any mistakes you may have had, and it looks more realistic. Animals have a lot of fur, and it often overlaps in multiple layers, so you will want to replicate that within your wood burning. Step number 10, irregularities are realistic. One important aspect that is often overlooked is the fact that imperfections and irregularities are realistic. When wood burning fur, don't make each layer the same. Mix things up. If you create fur strokes that always have the same look and value, then it'll look too consistent and too flat. Try adding a few darker strokes within the lighter fur and keep some lighter strokes within the darker fur. That really helps to create depth and realism. You cannot have light without dark, and you can't have dark without light. You have to have a nice balance of both. And now for my bonus tip, and this is something that you really need to take to heart. Beware the ugly duckling phase. Every piece of art that I've created goes through an ugly duckling phase. I'm sure that many artists have experienced this as well. You get to a point where you've spent a considerable amount of time on a project and it just isn't looking the way that you'd hoped. Unfortunately, it's easy to become discouraged at this point and quit. But try to remember that the ugly duckling phase is very common, but more importantly, it's only a phase. It can be difficult, but you must push through this stage and trust yourself to continue. Keep working, and you may be surprised at how well your work turns out in the end. Even if you're disappointed with the end results, be proud of the fact that you didn't quit. Perseverance can be a tremendous teacher. I hope these 10 tips help you with your wood burning project, and remember to go to patreon.com/Minisa if you'd like to take your wood burning skills to the next level. For as little as $5 a month, you can get instant access to my hand-drawn patterns, instructional videos, and written PDFs. For only $10 a month, you can get all that, plus access to my private Facebook group, where you can ask me questions, get critiques, participate in selecting upcoming projects, and more. So you can find more information at patreon.com/Minisa or on my website at minisapyrography.com. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.